Hey there. I'm Dr. Deborah Lukeovich, and I'm a depth psychology coach. I'm the author of Your Soul is Talking. Are You Listening? And I'm the host of Dose of Depth podcast. I'm also the author of a book that's coming out this October 2025, called When Sex Meets God, a Midlife Unraveling. So I recently did a video about the power of writing and why it's hard to get my clients to journal, and also different ways to use writing to communicate when we can't trust ourselves in person. So I wanted to continue that conversation and today talk about the power of the image journal and poetry. So at one point during my midlife unraveling, I would say it was about 2015, 2016. I didn't have words. My mind was not going to be helpful, which makes sense. I had lived the first part of my life sort of in the masculine with my intellect. I was an achiever. I went about things in a linear way, went from point A to B to C, and I achieved things. And then I had a falling apart, and my mind was not going to be useful. So I just intuitively, and because of my coursework at Pacifica, as I was pursuing my master's and PhD in depth psychology, got myself a really cool image journal. And I went to the bookstore and picked out something with a nice brown leather and these cool pages. And I just trusted myself to know what to do with it. And um, so first of all, a little theory. Carl Jung said that the language of the unconscious of the psyche is the image. Now, we automatically think that an image is visual, but for me, image is sort of like an impression that's made on you. So, an emotional experience can be an image that you can explore, or uh, a metaphor is an image, or a dynamic from this to that, or here to there. That can be an image to explore. And Jung also talked about the difference between a symbol and a sign. And a sign is really a visual in most cases, that we know what the meaning is. There's an agreed upon meaning and it's pretty mainstream. A symbol, on the other hand, is something that we might get a sense, or it has some kind of power on us, but there's not agreed upon understanding of its meaning. So, for example, the Christian cross as a symbol, that today is a symbol of redemption and the meaning of Christ's suffering and resurrection, the sense of redemption was not really something that was articulated at the time. It is something that came to have, the symbol had that meaning over time. And you'll notice that also over time, a symbol can lose its power, its mysteriousness, its magical nature, you'll notice. So, with those things in mind, images can be a way that we can explore something before it's ready to be articulated into words. And even poetry. Poetry isn't a linear language. Poetry is mysterious and it speaks in metaphor and symbol because it speaks at a deeper level than our mind. And also, our mind is naturally defensive in nature. It seeks to just make things right that it already believes. So when a new insight wants to be born, our unconscious is going to be a little sneaky and around the mind and try to get the mind to be like, go over there, go look at that while something new is percolating in you. So I thought that I would share how I used my image journal. And it was probably about a 2 year period where I drew in it a lot. But I picked out some particular images that I'm going to share. And it was really interesting experience. The first time, and for those listening to my podcast, I'll describe it as best I can, but you might want to go watch the YouTube video version of this because I'll share the images. So, the first experience of drawing, I was at a bar, and the owner of the bar happened to be an artist. And he would say, "Hey, you want to draw tonight?" So I was like, "Sure." But I had an artist complex. I have two very successful sisters. So I sort of, diminished my own creativity and my creative potential. I did find I could be really creative in the garden, though. So anyway, this night I'm like, oh, I'm going to force myself to draw just whatever comes up. And all that came up was I just started drawing lines from the center of the page to the outer edges of this piece of construction paper. And I got really mesmerized by it. And I kept drawing and drawing and drawing and drawing. And then I looked at it and I stood back and I was like, oh my gosh, that space in the middle is in the shape of a heart. What is going on here? So I outlined the heart and I drew it in really like there was so much intensity and emotion. And I drew it in with these colors of red and pink and purple. And then I colored in all the spaces between the lines and I started crying. And I was like, I felt like I was in kindergarten, and that was sort of the key. So I had, my inner child had sort of been stunted. And so that was my inner child finding me. And it was really interesting because after I drew that and felt that and something processed, whoa, she really wanted to play. And it was kind of crazy. I'd burst out in cartwheels and skip and all sorts of things. And so that was the first image. The second image that is really powerful, or not second, but the second that I'm sharing with you today, is now it's maybe a year later, and I've been divorced, and I've done some online dating, and I get swept up in this relationship where I've never felt this way, where I really was like, I felt like I was swept up by Aphrodite herself, and I felt like this man was Hermes, the trickster, and whoo. And we have been dating maybe a month, and we were going to be going hiking the next day on a Saturday. And that night I had an embodied dream. So an embodied dream is when you wake up and you just feel like it's so real. And I won't explain the whole dream. I do that in another video about my midlife dreams. But I drew the dream and I was trying to capture the sense of safety that I had never felt before. So see, this is an example of an image, an experience of safety that was unfamiliar to me. And in my drawing, again, I'll share this. In my drawing, I added a pair of hands at the bottom of me falling down a hill. That's what the dream was about. And I looked and I'm like, why did I draw those hands? And it was to capture the sense of safety. And I knew that I was coming into contact with either something that transcended me, that made me feel safe. Some might call it God or the cosmos or nature, or this deeper part of me. So far, those drawings actually ushered something in, an insight that I could not have gotten through just writing or even regular talk therapy. Then poetry. So it was this crazy relationship with this younger man who forced me to write poetry. And I just would sweat because, I have an artist complex, but I did it because I knew it was good for me. And he held space for me and I felt safe in it. But this is one of the poems I wrote now, probably a year later from the time of the Feeling Safe dream. And I'll just read it. It's still vulnerable. And it's titled Time for Rest. And it's a tanka. So it's got a little more syllables and a couple more lines than a haiku. Heavy, tired head, delphinium in full bloom. Fall now, time to rest. I can't blossom anymore. Time for quiet reflection. So that was a poem that captured how I was feeling that I couldn't articulate in words. It was a sort of like, I'm tired of being strong because delphiniums are really bold, but they're also delicate in that if a thunderstorm comes along and there's not a helpful stake holding it up, it will fall. It will bend in half and that big, beautiful blossom will die. So that's an example of how a tanka poem allowed me to process and to express that I was trying to give myself permission to not be so bold anymore and that I could rest. The next image is pretty funny, actually. So now it's another year later, and I'm getting really angry at a job that was an answer to a prayer, but became like a curse for me. But I didn't have an alternative. I had to find a way to stay in this job. And there were some objective things that the organization was doing that I just knew were the wrong things. And they didn't appreciate my opinion anymore. And it was just so frustrating. So at this event that I did not want to be at, I was so angry. I couldn't even believe how angry I was, but I didn't allow myself to get up and walk out of this workshop. That would have been cool, but I wasn't brave enough to do that yet. So I pulled out my color pencils and I started drawing these tiny little circles. And I'm going to share this image too. So I filled up my image journal page with tiny little circles that I was just drawing. And you could tell, like, oh my gosh, I was so angry. And then I colored them in different shades of blue. And it just helped me withstand the anger that I was feeling. And so I sort of, that anger was expressed onto the page. And what's interesting about that is the rest of that event, I did something really bold after that. So anger is a really interesting emotion because if you can play with the anger and explore it, it will transmute into something more empowering and creative. And that's exactly what happened. So then I was meditating, and as I was coming into deeper relationship and allowing these images to speak to me, even if I didn't always know what they meant, I had really another embodied experience, and I call it a spiritual orgasm. I was meditating, and I was actually doing some traditional prayers, and then I felt really aroused, and I had this image of a chalice, and a chalice is a symbol of the feminine receptivity. And there's that saying about how in order to fill yourself up with something new, you have to pour out the old and you have to be ready to receive. And so I drew this chalice and I also felt like this light emanating from my head and into my head. And I was like, is it coming in or out? And so it got me thinking about the chalice. Is my chalice full of something that needs to be emptied out? And am I ready to receive something new? I wouldn't have been able to say what I just said to you without drawing this experience. And then there was a crazy thing I had to draw. I had a fantasy. So a fantasy is not necessarily something you decide you want to have. Sometimes you'll have these images that make you cringe. And mine was of being sexually submissive to this man. And I had to draw it. I even searched on the internet, how you do draw a naked man standing with an erect penis, and how do you draw a kneeling naked woman? And what was interesting is as I drew it, the word receptive came up and I wrote receptive, and I'll share this image too, on the piece of paper. And so again, sexuality and sexual images are mostly misunderstood. And what this was saying was that I needed to submit and surrender and be receptive to this deeper self, this deeper ordering principle that was trying to prompt me to grow and to expand. And then the last image I'll share that I drew was during, now fast forward another year, and during a period where I was coming to the end of this ironic relationship. And one day it just became really clear that the purpose of the relationship wasn't to last. It was all the transformation that ended up happening. And I was angry about what was happening with this man. And I felt duped. And I was also having hot flashes and night sweats at night. And also I had a couple of weeks ago, I had forgotten, I got approval to do a workshop, my first workshop talking about my research about reconciling sexuality and spirituality. And so the next day I just drew, and all this anger and other dreams about phallic symbols and everything came together. And I ended up drawing this thing I called womb on fire and writing all these words like feminine phallus and creativity and crazy mad woman. And what's interesting is after I drew that crazy thing, the next day I wrote the complete outline for my workshop. So again, this combination of, emotions that they're aware and conscious is trying to communicate something to us, but something that goes against maybe the mind. And the mind can sometimes say, you're not capable of doing this. And the unconscious is like, oh, yes, you are. So those are, I like to make myself vulnerable. So you are willing to make yourself vulnerable as well. And just wanted to follow up on the power of writing, that if you already have a journaling practice, you might find that sometimes journaling isn't the right thing to do. And you're like, I don't know what to journal. And sometimes pulling out your image journal will help you, or writing a tanka poem. And actually, that is the most amazing thing to write poetry, because The mind doesn't create it. The mind receives, and we receive from creative intelligence. And then the mind, the masculine, is what helps us bring form, either the words or the actual drawings. So I hope you find that interesting. And if you do, don't forget to subscribe and like and go to my website, deborahlukovich.com. I have that book coming out soon. You can get on my list so you know when it's launching. And that's it. Take care.